Welcome to video 1.1a, which is all about navigating our production file server. Now you might be wondering, what is a file server? Why do you use it? So for us, a file server is just simply a place that's central that you can put all of your files like notes, PowerPoints, different software media, really just almost anything as far as files or folders. It's really not as unusual as you may think. It's very much like navigating any folder, even on your desktop. So simply doing this, going onto your desktop and creating a file just like that and calling it the year, for example, in 2018, and then creating subfolders inside of it. For example, let's say you want to create a folder that says tax, and you wanted to then put a document inside of it. For example, I'll just simply create a text file that just says tax notes, and in there I'll say need to call CPA. So this is just simply a way to organize yourself, right? So you just have on your desktop a folder, inside of that a subfolder, and inside of that a document. So in its complete basic sense, a file server is doing exactly that. It's just allowing you to store those things somewhere besides on your computer, because your computer has a single hard drive in it, usually right here, and there is really not a lot of backup that happens for the files that are on your computer. So if your computer was to crash, for example, or the hard drive was to die or things like that, you could literally lose that file or folder forever. You may have to spend a bunch of money. I'm talking sometimes thousands of dollars to do some special file recovery on it if it was important enough, but for the most part, if you just have all your important files on your personal laptop or your work laptop or your work desktop, there is no assurance that you're actually going to have it backed up. Now, on a corporation's file server, that's a whole different thing. The file server is backed up usually on a nightly basis, so anything that you put on this guy is going to be backed up, and you have some kind of assurance that you're never going to lose your precious documents that you've been putting lots of time into. So that's just a quick description of why we actually need a file server. So just to kind of summarize, in its most simplest form, a file server allows you to put files in folders and organize your documents, but mainly it allows you to have a place that's central that's backed up. So that's really the biggest advantage over storing files on your actual computer. So with that said, let's look more deeply at what we're doing. So it says this video is going to take you through the process of connecting to the file server and mapping the following universal naming convention paths to drive letters. Now, we intentionally wrote this using some of the buzzwords that you'll see. So UNC, or Universal Naming Convention, sounds kind of crazy and very techy, but it's just really simple. All it is basically // the name of the server, which in our case is file mn550 prod 01, and then / the name of the share. So basically the place where they shared all the files, basically. And the T letter here is completely arbitrary. I could have called it T, I could have called it Z. It just really could be any letter after C, because if you look at your computer, generally, if you go to this PC, the C drive is usually the default drive that you have, and then the D drive is usually if you have a physical DVD or things like that. So generally people don't use those letters for mapping a drive to a file server. They'll usually use a letter much higher than that. So T is just more of a logical thing. We pick T for training and S for software. And every company is going to have a different standard. It's just realize that the letter T doesn't really mean anything too specific. It just is whatever standard the company wants to follow. People do get hung up on that a lot. They think that the T drive or the S drive is something physical. It's really just similar to, for example, when you plug in a USB drive to your computer and all of a sudden it'll show up as the F drive or something of that nature, right? It's just a drive that you now have access to. So we're used to working with physical drives, like the C drive is the actual hard drive that's in your computer. The D drive is the physical DVD that's in your computer. Likewise, if you were to plug in a physical USB, it would show up as the F drive, so that's the physical USB. The big difference here is you're now connecting to a share that's loaded on the file server, and you're just giving it a drive letter of T, which again is arbitrary, and arbitrary is a term you see in the business world a lot. It just means I'm basically kind of like pulling it out of thin air. It's just something I just came up with. It doesn't physically mean anything. So with that said, let's get started. The first thing you want to do before you map a drive is you want to make sure you're actually on the network, because it stands to reason if you're going to connect to this file server and map a drive, you better be able to actually get to it. So some really basic things is you want to check that you're connected to the wireless network. In this case, it's Transcend IT Internal is our production wireless, and that's what I want you to be on in order to complete this. So you want to see that it says connected and secured. So in theory, this means that we should be up and running. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to this little search box right here. We're going to type RUN for run. And this is actually something you're going to use quite a bit in a lot of labs. This run prompt is used a lot by IT folks and even what they call power users, which are users that tend to know how to navigate the system pretty well. So if you're going to use something often, it's actually kind of nice to pin it. So if you right click on this run and you say pin to taskbar, you see how it shows up right here. So now I don't have to go in here and type run every time and click on it. I can just simply go over to here and just left click on it, and it pulls up the run prompt. So it's actually really handy to pin things to your taskbar like that. So at this point we have confirmed that we are on the network and we've got our run prompt. So at this point you would type in the UNC path, so // file mn550 prod 01. Now on a sidebar, this is called a naming convention, which you'll see in every corporation. Hopefully they have a naming convention, and the naming convention is to give someone the opportunity to understand exactly what they're looking at in a really concise manner without having to guess, well, what is this device, right? It gives you a system to follow. So our system is the first 4 letters, so to speak. File is indicating the function of this device, so that's a file server. The next 5 characters is the location. So in Minnesota, this is our site 550. Now in our case it's the only site because Transcend only has one site at this point, but in a large company like, let's say, 3M or Best Buy or Unisys, those very large companies, they're going to have hundreds of locations. So having some kind of site code like this is really useful, and having it follow a consistent pattern. So having 5 characters is easy to follow because it's a state and then 3 numbers. Now you don't want to just switch back and forth to have 4 for certain things, 6 for certain things, because then it's not really following a consistent pattern. And then the next 4 characters are basically production, so prod for production. You could have test if it was for a test location. And then 01 is basically saying this is the first file server. So in other words, any old person, once they understood our naming convention, could literally just look at this name and say, oh, okay, I get it. It's a file server. It's located in Minnesota at site 550. It's a production file server, and it's the first one. And also I'm throwing the word production out there. So production basically means the system or environment that the company is actually using to actually make money, so to speak. So it's the systems that are actually really important for the company. So if you ever see production, don't actually do any testing or mess with it unless you're sure of what you're doing, because if you cause any problems to a production system during the day, there could be hundreds or thousands of people actually using that system, so you have to be really cautious when using a production system. If it says test or dev, usually dev means it's a development environment, or test, then that's fine. That's usually just for messing around and learning. Some people also call it a sandbox. So just throwing some terms out there. You'll want to take notes on these types of things. So that's just more background. So back to what we were doing. So we're going to type in the UNC path right now. So we're going to do / file mn550 prod 01. And you can actually just not even type the whole thing and just hit OK at this point. And it's going to basically pull up this login window. And this is basically authenticating you so that the file server can make sure that you are authorized to access these files. So we need to log in with transcend IT / and then your username. So I'm using this temporary username, which is a fake person called Ted Trainee, and I'm just doing this for training purposes. You're going to log in with whatever your actual transcend name is. So if your name was Phil Swanson, you're going to log in like that. So whatever your actual name is what you're going to use here. For me, it's ted.trainee. And then I'm going to log in with my password. And I'm going to hit OK. So at this point, I'm going to hopefully connect to the file server. So it looks like it's thinking a little bit here, and there we go. So on the file server, I can see I've got these 2 shares, and the share looks like this. It basically looks like it's got like a little T intersection, so that's supposed to look like a share essentially. So if you look at the directions, it says map the T drive to the training share and map the S drive to the software share. So if you look at training, now it's going to ask you to authenticate again because I didn't click this remember my credentials, and also because the first time I connected to the server itself, and now I'm connecting to an actual share, so it's going to ask me to log in again. So I'm going to do transcend IT / ted.trainee, and again you're going to log in with your actual username. So it'll be transcend IT, which by the way, this is the name of the domain that we're connected to, which we're not going to get into all that. That's a whole different topic about Active Directory, which is this whole system that manages users and file shares, which we'll get into much later in the curriculum. Right now, you're more using this as a user. You're just trying to learn how to connect to a file share. We don't need to go into all those types of details. So you put in the domain, which is transcend IT / your username, and then again your password. And now we're going to say remember credentials, and there we go. So we're able to connect to the training folder now, or training share. Inside of the training share, we see that there's a whole bunch of folders in it. So really, like, this is what I was talking about. This doesn't look a whole lot different than you just simply, even looking at your desktop and looking at folders this way. This looks very similar to this. It's just now you're connected to a remote file server and you're putting files on it, because again, the reason to do that is that this thing is backed up on a regular basis. So if someone even deletes a file or who knows what happens, they can restore it. There's a team which manages backups on the servers, and they can easily restore it, versus if you delete it on here, well, you know what happens. You lose it, or you have to spend a bunch of money trying to recover it. So that's a very basic example of how to connect to the training share. Now, some people actually just do that. They'll connect just to the UNC Path and they'll just use things that way. So if you want to, you could. So you could literally just go to the run prompt, type this, hit OK, and it's going to take you to training, and then you could just navigate things that way. And you can go in here, and so I already created this TED trainee, but I'm going to go ahead and create a subfolder. So I already created one called Notes and PowerPoint. I'm going to create one just to show an example called Videos, or just Video. So clearly I can navigate through the UNC Path if I wanted to, but I mean, looking at it realistically, that's not the most convenient way to do things if you're not a IT person or what have you, because most users are going to wonder, what in the world is that all about? Why do I need to type / some weird name when all I want to do is get to the T drive, right? The T drive is much easier to understand because it's similar to what you're used to seeing. You're used to seeing a C drive or an F drive if you plug in a USB drive. So just thinking in terms of a drive letter is way easier to understand. But I just wanted to show you that you can browse things using the UNC path, or you can actually map a drive, which is what you would normally do for users especially. So let's now do that. So let's go back to the file server level. So now we've got our two shares, so it's super easy to map a drive. You literally just right click on the share and you do map network drive, and you pick the T drive, and you want to click this button that says reconnect at sign in. So what that means is if you reboot this computer, it's going to automatically connect to that T drive again. And you can see, we have all these drive letters that we can pick from. So that's why I was saying it was arbitrary. The T is just strictly to have some kind of standard. T for training, S for software. So also in our case, we want to click this connect using different credentials, because on your laptop, if you go to a command prompt, which by the way is something we'll also be doing a lot, so if you go to that search window and you type CMD, you'll get this thing called a command prompt. I want you to right click on that and pin that to the taskbar also, and voila, you see that it shows up right here. So when you click on that, it brings you to this weird black box, and this command prompt is actually a really powerful tool that you can do all kinds of stuff with, but for right now I'm just showing you that it exists, and I'm also showing you that it's the easiest way to see what you're logged in as. So you're logged in as just a user right now, which is a local user. It's not something on the domain. So by default, if you didn't click this button, it's going to try to authenticate to that file server on our domain as the user named quote-unquote user. which is actually not at all what exists on the domain. That's just only on your computer. The production domain user that I'm using in this example is ted.trainee. So if I want to log in as ted.trainee, I got to say connect using different credentials, and then I hit finish, and now it wants me to log in as ted.trainee. So I'm going to hit my password in there. So it's still got the domain /ted.trainee, which is my username, and remember, your username is going to be different. It's going to be whatever your first name period last name is. So I'm going to put in my password again just to make sure I didn't typo that. And I'm going to, important here, click remember my credentials because I don't want to have to do this every time. So I'm going to go like that. And look at that, I've got myself a T drive. So if you click on this PC, it actually looks kind of like just another drive. So you've got your C drive, you've got your D drive, which again is your CD-ROM usually, and now you've got your T drive, and that's something that a user is going to be able to see and really kind of relate with. They're going to, be able to use it in a really easy manner this way. They're like, oh, okay, great, I can just go to my T drive, I can browse my files, I can create files, I can put things in here, all that. It's super easy. So just to complete the exercise, we'll also do the S drive. So if we go back to our server, we see that we have our software share, and we had the S drive that we're going to map to the software share. So we're going to right click on software, and we're going to click map network drive. Again, we have this drive letter, which is arbitrary. But look, T drive is no longer available because that one is used for the other drive that we just mapped. So now we're going to pick the S drive, which is for the software share. Again, I'm going to click reconnect at sign in because next time this computer reboots, I want it to still have the S drive and the T drive so that it's super easy for the user. They never have to log in again, they never have to do anything. It's just those two drives are always there for them to actually use, because again, we're trying to make things easy for the user so that they can do their job and help the company accomplish whatever projects they want to do. So we want to also click this because we want to log in as the domain user, which is in my case ted.trainee, and not my local user, which is just called user. So I'm going to click this connect using different credentials, hit finish, and of course it's going to prompt me to log in. So again, I've got my Transcend IT, which is my domain, and then my domain user, which in my case is ted.trainee. In your case, it's going to be your first name dot last name, and then the password. I'm actually going to do that again just to make sure. And I'm going to click remember my credentials, and boom, just like that, I've got myself an S drive. So if you look, if you click on this PC, you've got the S drive, which is mapping you to software folder. On this folder, we do have, if you look at desktop, under student software, we've got a bunch of different software that you'll be using for different labs and whatnot. So this is just getting you started and getting you access to this environment and just introducing you to what in the heck a file server is, why it matters, using this concept of this UNC Path, which is more techy and just kind of a way that you could connect to it directly, or also using more of the common way that users access it, which is through a drive letter. Now this is a lot to take in, of course, so make sure you take detailed notes and ask your trainer questions as you have them. Thank you so much, and we are now done with video 1.1, navigating the production file server.